Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 5. This podcast is for and about people getting ready for their first ever pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. Your dream of walking the Camino. How's that going? What are you imagining when you consider everything that could be possible on a pilgrimage of this scale? Can you see yourself on the trail? It all starts with a dream, and then it turns into a goal. Then you start to make plans, and the next thing you know, you are taking your first steps on a journey with the potential to change your life. Hi, this is Nancy, back again with another pilgrim story, this time with what I will call a success story. It is filled with great tips and perspectives you haven't yet heard on this podcast. For one, my guest, Kurt from Palm Springs, California, follows a vegan diet, which is sometimes difficult to do in Spain. But it doesn't have to define your pilgrimage. He has some great tips for finding vegan and vegetarian food amidst a landscape of pork-based meal options. Next, Kurt is a fairly speedy walker, and his pace did help define his experiences. And he did something I recommend every first-time pilgrim does, and does thoroughly. He trained for the physical challenge of the walk. He is going to share with you how that helped define his experience. And he's going to share his perspective on day one walking on the Camino Francés route from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port to Roncesvalles in one day. What that experience is like for a first-time pilgrim filled with anticipation and excitement for what lies ahead. What does lie ahead? In a word, the unknown. How to get the most out of this once-in-a-lifetime experience? That's in here too. Before we say hello to Kurt, I want to give a quick shout out to a few people. First, to my September Camino Experience group. The final 3 pilgrims have reached Santiago. Joanna, Laura, and Jen, you are so inspiring. Such rock stars. It has been an honor to follow and support you on this journey. And to all of my listeners who met one or more of the 10 pilgrims in my September group, most of whose names I don't know, and especially to the one whose name I do know, Megan from Australia. Megan, what a delight to meet you via the video the other Nancy sent me. And congratulations for completing your pilgrimage. I am so honored to have been a part of your journey. Okay, now let's jump right in and meet Kurt. Kurt, hi. Thanks so much for being on the podcast with me.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Nancy, for having me.
Yeah, it was such a surprise to run into you on the Camino on my day 2, your day 1. And we had a connection already, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, at some point. But I was just so happy to meet you going over the Pyrenees.
Well, same here. It was actually you who were my first connection to the Camino. When I decided to do the Camino de Santiago, when I started looking around, I found your podcast. So I've been an early adopter, I guess. I think you've been doing it for a year or so before I came on, but I listened to all of your podcasts and listened to you slavishly in preparation for the Camino.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that I was your first introduction to the Camino.
You were the gateway drug.
I'm the gateway drug. Yes. Thank you for letting me know that. I love that. I just love that. Now, you used the word slavishly.
Oh, yeah. So I followed every word and offering and that you had.
Okay.
So I followed you, yes, slavishly.
Slavishly. Okay, I didn't know how that word was being used. I didn't know it was a is that an adverb? Is that a
I guess it would be because it describes an action. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, there's a new use of that word I didn't know. All right, cool. Well, as it happened, very good. And you also use the audio guide, the Camino Francés Getting
Yes.
Started audio guide.
Yes, I did because
Excellent.
when this would have been probably about over a year ago that I decided that I wanted to walk the Camino. So I started doing research, and when you dip your toe into this whole ecosystem online, lots of things pop up. And your podcast, when I started looking at podcasts, was one of the first ones that popped up. So I, of course, followed that and downloaded it. And there were a couple other podcasts as well. So that helped me prepare for the Camino.
Excellent. Very good. So let's start where I like to start always, and that is put the pin in the map. Will you share with us what you did? What was your Camino? Start, finish, and how much time you took?
Okay, so I did the Camino Francés, and I started in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France, walked up over the Pyrenees to Compostela. And then because I tend to like to complete things, I continued walking to the coast to Finisterre.
Okay.
Now, I walked from Compostela to Murcia and then down to Finisterre because I wanted to end my Camino at the end of the world. So it was on May 13th, 2024 is when I started in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. I arrived in Compostela, Santiago de Compostela in 29 days later. So I think that was June 10th. And then it was 4 more days to Finisterre. So on June 14th, I finished the full length of Spain. And so that was 33 days, 29 to Compostela, 33 to Finisterre.
Okay. Now, if we do some math, to me, those look like pretty long days. How long were your days? How many kilometers each day? And how much time were you on the trail each day, sort of as an average?
Well, if the math adds up, the average for all of this was 27.3 kilometers a day.
Okay.
So usually my days ran anywhere from 25 to 30 kilometers was pretty much a typical day. Though I did have I had one day 41 and a half, and then I had another day that was only 17.
Okay.
So roughly give or take, about 27 to 28 kilometers a day on average. And my walking speed was 5 kilometers an hour. So that was actually very easy to figure out when I was on the Camino, how many hours it was going to take. So usually I walked between 6 and 7 hours a day.
Okay. I love how simple the math is when we switch into kilometers.
Yes.
For some reason, miles confound me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, somebody asked me recently, how far do you walk on your walks at home? And I'm like, 3 kilometers. And they're like, sorry, what?
Yeah.
I somehow can't think in miles anymore when it comes to walking.
Well, that was actually a bit of advice I received really, really early on when I started researching doing the Camino. It was suggested that you switch your training into kilometers. So everything in Europe is in kilometers and meters. And so if you start training, you start getting that sensibility of what that is. And so I immediately changed all my apps on my phone into kilometers, and also it will help do the 24-hour clock.
There it is. Yes.
And I think that that's also a bit of preparation and training as well, getting accustomed to seeing you do that in that mileage or kilometerage in distance as opposed to mileage. So you don't have to translate. It's one less thing to deal with when you're actually in Europe.
Absolutely. And it is also part of the culture. The culture
Sure.
operates in kilometers in a 24-hour clock. And so for me, it makes me feel like I'm actually part of the culture of Spain when I operate that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to just make sure we've got that average speed 5 kilometers per hour,
Mhm.
which for me is very fast. Now, I remember meeting you on the trail. You're taller than I am, so you probably have some longer legs than I do, so you can move a bit more quickly. And those days for me would have been long. And so I think this is a great illustration that it's a personal experience in terms of how far you walk each day and how fast you walk and how much time you spend on the trail.
Sure. Yeah. And I have to say that this speed was my natural walking speed. This is one of the things that I quickly discovered that this is just my natural pace. And walking slower was actually very difficult. So also another thing that I think made the difference is I walked with hiking poles, trekking poles, and I'm a firm believer in that. You don't get sausage fingers. You also have extra balance, and possibly you may walk a little faster with them. That I discovered I actually use them. It's 4 body parts walking, not just 2. And I think that also is less fatiguing by having the trekking poles.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. It offloads some of the energy that goes through my legs. So
Exactly.
especially going uphill, you
Hmm.
can push with your
Hmm.
hands and your arms and use your core strength to propel yourself up the hill.
Yeah. And also, even on the flats in the Meseta, I found myself. It's almost that you're propelling yourself even though it's on flat, and
Yeah.
in that I think it also is less stress on the back and the body. So
Hmm.
there tends to be. I wasn't sore
Mm.
walking the Camino. I know that there's a lot. There's a lot of exercise going on
There
during that
is a
day.
lot.
Yeah, yeah. So I found them to be very helpful, and I won't even get up out of bed and walk to the kitchen without my trekking poles now that I'm back.
Really?
Yeah, I love trekking poles. I'm just joking.
They're attached to you now. They're part
Yeah.
of you. I love that. Wow. So let's answer the question that my listeners are now asking. Did you bring your trekking poles with you from home on the airplane, or did you buy them when you got to Saint Jean Pied de Port?
I am a preparer, and I bought my trekking poles, and I had actually been training with them, and so I brought my trekking poles. I didn't want any what's the word I'm looking for. I didn't. I wanted to take everything that I was training with me. So I packed my poles. I bought an inexpensive duffel bag, and I put them in a mailing tube. I also packed a Swiss Army knife, so that was in the mailing tube as well,
Okay.
and that was shipped separately. So I had this double bag with nothing in it except those two. So it was actually quite light, and I'm glad I did. So
Okay.
I was concerned because I was fitted with my I checked several different trekking poles, and these felt really good, and I didn't want to get blisters on my fingers by changing a grip or changing trekking poles. So I brought my trekking poles with me.
I love how well thought out that is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I still like lost for that word. I didn't want any extraneous um, variables
Mm.
on the Camino,
Hmm.
because when you start looking into and you get deeper and deeper into the world of the Camino, which is a fascinating world, that there's so much talk about blisters.
Hmm.
Now growing up here in the United States in the 70s, I thought quicksand would be a bigger challenge in my adult life. And I kind of equate that with blisters on the Camino.
Quicksand. Hold on. Hold on. Why quicksand?
Well, every cartoon that in the 1970s or Lassie show, there's somebody's in quicksand, and I've yet to encounter quicksand in my adult life.
Oh my gosh, that is
And,
fantastic.
and so I
You're
kind
so
of
right.
so I was really concerned about blisters, and people, wait, that's like the number one thing that you hear about are
Yeah.
blisters. And so I thought I'm going to do everything I can to prepare myself not to get blisters. So I started when I was training, I would rub and put lotion on my feet. I had my same socks. I found a pair of shoes, trail runners. They're actually Ultra Trail Runner 7. Those worked really well for me because I have a wide toe box.
Okay.
And after training with them for a bit, I bought 3 other pairs. So when in my training, I would wear out a pair, and then so I knew that I had the same shoes that I'd be walking in. So then I actually wore out 2 pairs of shoes training, and then I put on maybe 30 kilometers on the pair that I was going to walk on the Camino.
I love that strategy.
Yeah, so I didn't want any wild card variables. And so the clothing, I was training with my clothing. I was training with my backpack filled with what I was taking. So I was recreating the situation.
You were mimicking what you were going to be doing.
As much as you can, yeah.
Yeah, and there's only so much you can do, but you did what you could do. So you, like you said, you attended to everything that was within your control, probably knowing that once you get on the Camino, there will be plenty of things that are not within your control.
Yes. Well, the other thing that was a bit of a concern for me, because I'm not really athletic, and I live in the desert. Our elevation here on the desert floor is about 300 to 400 feet.
Okay.
And there's always this talk about Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port up over the Pyrenees, and it's straight out of Saint-Jean-Pied that is a little bit challenging. And so that was something that worried me.
Okay. Fortunately,
I live in Palm Springs, where the mountains are literally 10 minutes away and there are no foothills. So it actually goes from 400 feet directly up to 8,500 feet. So I started training walking the mountains just outside of the house and getting my elevation training. Even though I didn't get up to 3,000 feet, my training would go from 300, 400 feet to 1,600 feet.
There it is.
So I was trying to mimic that. So if I do 18 kilometers of that, I surely could probably continue on at that same pace, continuing up over the Pyrenees. And it worked.
I love that. Very good. Yeah, it's so interesting. We all plan and prepare differently. Some people love it. Some people love the details. Let's map it all out. Let's envision it all. Let's plan for this. Some people don't. They want to get on a plane and show up and see what happens. And I think you should do, and I'm speaking to my listeners, you should do it the way you want to do it. If you love to plan.
Yes. And I think that it's also how you approach life. This is just a microcosm of life. And so I tend to be, I don't want a lot of different variables. I want to have at least kind of control as much as I can and be prepared. So I did a lot of preparation, not only the training or conditioning for the Camino, but also reading about the Camino. So that kind of had occupied my life for about 9 months before after the decision. It was a goal.
You're not the only one. A lot of people do that. Yeah. And so let's talk now about the impact that had on your Camino experience. So you did all the planning, preparation, you fell into the quicksand of the Camino planning process.
Yes, I guess this is the quicksand that I did fall into.
A little different than what you imagined, but yeah. So how did that impact your experience? Can you see a direct correlation between how prepared you were and how it went?
Well, because I don't have another experience to compare it to, I suppose without a doubt, it didn't impact my experience. The one thing that I discovered, and I discovered somewhat early on, is I am completely out of sync with Spain.
Oh, how so?
Meaning, it could have been the preparation that walking, I walked faster. So I didn't meet a Camino family as some people do. And that was part of that. I met individuals that were quite lovely, but they were of a similar walking the speed. And I
Mhm.
found that when I would walk with people and chat, it was so slow that it was only a few minutes
Okay.
that I could maintain that, because I felt, that this isn't right for me. It doesn't feel comfortable. The other thing is that language was something that plays a really important role in I think the Camino family, and meeting people on the Camino is when I walked this. So this was basically the middle of May to the middle of June.
Mhm.
There were a lot of Italians, Spanish, and French on the Camino, and very little English spoken. The friends that I did make were from New Zealand and Australia. So it was English speaking, and also some American. So the language plays, I think, a bigger kind of gate of entry to that than we talk about. So that was
Mm.
where, when communication is difficult, it doesn't make for easy conversation. Though,
Mhm.
and that was something that I discovered when I was saying that. I was quickly learned that I was out of sync with Spain, and also with the Camino, because I was basically passing people,
Mhm.
which I didn't really think too much about, because that's just my natural gait. There was, so that's how I moved. So I would end up arriving at my destinations before they were even open. So I spent a lot of my Camino time waiting for my casseroles and pensions to actually allow me in,
Mm.
and then also waiting for kitchens to open for lunch,
Mhm.
and then when I would readjust, I would be too late and miss the kitchen. So no matter what I did, I seemed to be completely out of sync
Interesting.
with Spain, and with the Camino for the most part. Yeah.
Did you ever dial that in? Did it ever get to where it felt like a good sync?
Some days I would try to adjust for it and then be frustrated because it happened again. So like being too early for waiting for the kitchen to open, that happened a lot. And then so it's like, okay, I'll do a longer day. Well, then I get there in this place, they close the kitchen at 2, not at 2:30. Or
Aha.
so there was this constant kind of nagging feeling in the back of, it's like, am I going to be able to get lunch? Because that was kind of a consideration. And then it would also then happen, just this is just something first time pilgrims be aware of this. Everything is shut on Sunday, and when you're on the Camino, it's easy to lose the days. And it seemed like every week I would forget these places would be shut on Sunday. And I think, okay, I have a long day ahead of me. I'm going to stop at Dia, which is a grocery store, which is quite lovely. And they have a lot of options. The morning I walk out, it would be a Sunday. I was like, oh, they're shut. So now I
Yeah.
have a day without snacks. So even though, as much as I was trying to be prepared and I was
Okay.
aware of this, these things kind of like just mounted up.
Yeah. Yeah. So the rhythm of Spain is very distinct. And to me, it feels immovable. It doesn't bend with our needs. It
Yeah.
is the way it is. And there are places where they've adapted for pilgrims. But yeah, you're right. The places where we sleep and stay have opening and closing hours. The places where we get our food, kitchens open, kitchens close. And yeah, and to compound it, it's not the same every place along the trail.
No, and that was it was constantly this shifting
Mhm.
of kind of the goalposts, as it were.
Yeah.
There is one place, just so the first time pilgrims know, in Rabanel del Camino, Posada El Ticin,
The best.
kitchen does not shut until 8 p.m.
Yep. Continuous.
They are continuous. And that was the only place that I saw a notice of that on the whole Camino, that they actually accommodate the pilgrims coming in at that point with the kitchen staying open.
Hmm. Hmm. And they have some good food options for those who are vegetarian and vegan.
Yes, and this is true. And that was another point that I wanted to make, is that they had a vegan menu. And for we Americans who like our ketchup they actually bring you a bottle of ketchup and put it on the table with mustard and salt and pepper. This is something that also was revelatory to me, is that they don't have condiments in northern Spain.
Yeah, not the way we do them anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. French fries are actually ubiquitous. Almost every pilgrim meal comes with French fries, and there isn't usually ketchup.
Or just a single one of those little tiny packets.
One little packet, that's all you get. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
Yeah. And also salt and pepper.
Yeah, not usually on the table.
So that was something that I purchased and I carried with me, is a container of salt.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. It is part of the Camino experience, being in another country and working those things out. But I think it actually is notable that you said you didn't ever feel like you got in sync with it. And so that's in terms of managing expectations for people getting ready to be aware that it may
Yes.
feel like that. Honestly, the first few years I was on the Camino and in Spain, I didn't get Spain at all. I just didn't
Yeah.
get it. I don't understand why their timing is this and why they eat here and why that's closed then. Yeah. Now it feels more natural than home.
Right. And even, even being aware of that
Yeah.
and trying to account for that, I still was not, I still had great, I shouldn't say great difficulty, but it was a challenge.
Sure.
All of these can be overcome, but there were sometimes it was really frustrating, particularly when I was specifically aware and tried to alleviate the situation and then still was thwarted.
You did your part and then they didn't help you out there. Well, let's talk about food. So
Okay.
you follow a vegan diet,
Correct. I'm a new easy vegan here. So
a new one.
vegan, yeah.
Okay, new vegan. I know that my vegan listeners now have a pen and paper in hand and are ready to jot down any words of wisdom or suggestions you have. What would you say about your vegan experience on the Camino Francés?
Well, I have to say that you can do vegan on the Camino. It was actually not as difficult as I thought that it was going to be, because northern Spain is known for pork
Mm-hmm.
and jamon, and also then later when you get into Galicia, octopus and seafood and such. So
Yuck.
I was pleasantly surprised that it was possible to eat vegan. Now, the variety of vegan options is quite limited. So I will say that I've never eaten more bread than I have in the month that I was on the Camino.
Right.
Bread is everywhere, and sometimes, and particularly for breakfast, it's a very bread-centric kind of early morning day. Now, there are restaurants that cater to vegans and vegetarians, and actually I saw quite a few of them, and so I would always look for like a sandwich board out, and there was usually a vegetarian option. And so when I say I'm an easy vegan, I started out eating only vegan. Probably about 3 weeks into it, there were some days where I couldn't, and I ended up eating some cheese.
Okay.
So there were vegan pizza options in some places, but not in all. But they do have vegetarian pizza. So I figured, okay, so I ended up having a vegetarian pizza as opposed to not.
Gotcha.
There was a little bit of fudging as far as that goes. And I don't, that's up to a personal point of view.
Yeah.
And so when push came to shove, I ended up eating some cheese on a vegetarian pizza. But as first-time pilgrims, there are, believe it or not, traditional Spanish foods that are vegan. And one of the go-to breakfast items is the tostada con tomate, tomate. And so basically it's toast with tomato. Mm-hmm. And that's really standard. This is also a French thing and an Italian thing, but it's pretty standard, and you can order that in any bar. Mm-hmm. And it's just basically toast with olive oil, a little salt and pepper, and then a pureed tomato. So they actually have that in small containers like jam. So
right.
A lot of times, so you could have apricot, plum, strawberry, or tomato.
Or tomato. Yeah. Would you like sweet or savory?
Yeah, so there was a lot of toast with
Yeah.
either jam or tomato on it. Another thing that is also very standard, so it is their lentil stew, and that's
Mm,
that's all vegan. There's no meat in it, and that's something that you could find in the smaller villages where it's just a bar.
mhm.
Where, but that would be a typical traditional Spanish meal, and then of course patata bravas,
Hmm.
potatoes with kind of a hot sauce tomatoey thing on it. And as I was mentioning, the vegetarian or vegan pizzas. So all these smaller places have frozen pizzas. So there usually is a vegetarian option, and that would be where you it's more vegetarian than vegan. And then paella, that was
Hmm.
another one. So a lot
Hmm.
of places have a pre-made vegetarian paella or vegan paella.
Excellent.
Yeah.
There are also a handful of proper pizzerias where they make the pizza for you.
Right. Yes.
I actually have a post on my blog about my 4 favorite pizza places on the Camino Francés. So I'll be sure to put that link in the show notes.
Yeah, and,
Yeah,
and in the larger cities, you can find vegan options much more readily.
definitely.
In the smaller villages, those kind of typical traditional meals are available.
Such a great point. I'm really glad you raised that, Kurt, because there are actually items in the Spanish palette that are vegan.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can also then just go to a grocery store. And I mentioned Dia before.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Dia. They're very clean and well lit and usually very well stocked.
Okay.
So another option then is they have like a couscous.
Yeah.
Some of these in the refrigerator section, they had some prepared foods like, of course, hummus and baba ganoush and couscous with vegetables and such. So there are some prepared meals or package that you could buy in the grocery store. So these other foods were just what you could get in the bars and restaurants.
Excellent. My favorite thing to pick up at the grocery store is the gazpacho, the small
Yes,
single serving gazpacho. Yeah.
in like a milk carton.
A little small plastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like you would get a smoothie at the grocery store kind of thing. Yeah. And it's gazpacho.
that was kind of a revelation for me as well when I discovered that, and they're really good.
They're really good. Yes. Really good. I do remember a gazpacho vending machine when I
Oh,
visited Seville one
uh-huh.
year. Like, that's it right there. You're singing my song.
So like an espresso machine, but it's like your
It was like a vending machine, just like where you would get bottles of water, cans of
oh, okay,
Cokes, candy bars, bags of chips. This one was all gazpacho.
that's cool.
It was great. I know my vegan listeners and maybe even vegetarian listeners are wondering about what you put in your coffee if you don't do dairy milk.
Well, cafe con leche is ubiquitous on the Camino, and
Yes.
I would just order cafe americano, which is essentially it's espresso with a little bit of hot water. So it's kind of close to an American coffee, but
Yeah.
that's readily available. So I basically drank cafe americano.
Okay. Got it. Did you ever do the non-dairy milks like oat, soy milk? No.
No,
Okay.
no,
They are available now in some places. So that's a great relief to vegans.
I haven't put dairy in my coffee for a long, long time. So that just is something that I don't do. So I don't do oat or soy. Just black coffee.
Very good. Now, you were talking earlier about finding places for lunch, finding places to stay. Did you use one of the apps for the Camino or a guidebook?
Well, for yes, all of the above.
Okay,
I had that Happy Cow app.
great one.
There weren't a lot on that app, so I would Google and search online to see, and those are usually in the larger cities. So
Mhm.
I used, or walking by the restaurants themselves, and there would be sandwich boards. So there would be vegetarian options. And so I figured if they have a vegetarian option, probably it could be kind of veered off into vegan.
And that's really true. And this is the thing we haven't talked about yet. Did you ever have a time when it didn't look like anything was offered and you had to special order something?
Well, yes, and they look at you askance. So the bocadillo is pervasive throughout the entire Camino. And the bocadillo is basically a piece of bread cut in half with a piece of cheese and then some sort of ham.
Mhm.
No mayonnaise, no mustard, no nothing.
No tomato, no lettuce, no pickles.
Nothing. So I would order, and this was in a small town in the Meseta. There was really no other options. And so I said, could I get a vegan bocadillo? And she looked at me like I had three heads. And I said, well, you have verduras, vegetales. And it's like, yes. It's like, oh, we have lettuce and tomato. I said, perfect.
Throw it on.
So I had a lettuce and tomato bocadilla. It's something else that you'll quickly learn. Salads in Spain contain egg and tuna. So ensalada mixta, which is a mixed salad, contains both egg and tuna. So I would order ensalada mixta, sin atún, and sin huevos. And again, they would look at me as sconces like, well, you're just getting salad.
Well, but then and what you're getting is often iceberg lettuce, a slice or two of tomato, and a slice or two of onion. Yeah. And maybe some corn sprinkled on top out of a can.
Corn and sometimes carrot.
Sometimes carrot, yeah.
Sometimes carrot. But that was, so you can actually get a vegan salad.
Yes.
As far as the dressings go, it's not that there is a wide variety of dressings. It's oil and vinegar.
Yeah. Super simple.
And that's it.
Yeah. Salads are not what they are in the US.
No, not at all.
We do salads as main courses.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is possible to cobble together with a little ingenuity and knowing some translation of what is on your salad or in your sandwich, that you can actually vegan.
Yes.
That impressed me, and it made me kind of happy that I was able to do that. And it made me feel kind of smart and ingenious. It's like, oh, well, now I know if I remove that, just that single thing, it will work for me.
Perfect. Well, I remember when we met in Pamplona, because you were there the same day that I was there with my group and joined us for our Pinchos crawl. And the Pincho scene is pretty lean when it comes to vegan.
Yeah.
But I remember you sharing with me some other places in Pamplona that you'd find that I hadn't even heard of or hadn't even found before. And my mouth was watering with you talking about what was available.
Yes. I actually, when I stayed in Pamplona, I stayed in rooms above a bar, which were really kind of down on San Nicolas Street, which is this Pincho Street, where they had some rooms above, and this it was called Baron Bar and Rooms, and the Baron Bar had really nice stuff. So they had vegetarian options, and I think there was maybe one vegan, but that night I actually had this really wonderful bowl of vegetables with a sun-dried tomato pesto. So I think there was a little cheese in the pesto, but you can kind of put the pesto on the side, but it was like wonderful grilled vegetables. So
lovely.
Sometimes you just want a bowl of vegetables.
Yes.
When you've been eating all this bread. Yeah.
Well, and not for nothing, but even people who aren't vegetarian and vegan sometimes want grilled vegetables.
Sure.
And I have discovered that if you ask for it, sometimes they have it. They can put it together for you. It's just a matter of requesting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Excellent. Well, I'm glad to know how that went for a vegan. So I would love to hear some of your favorite experiences or pleasant surprises that occurred on the trail. Any adventures or stories that you'd like to share with us?
Well, the first day out is always, there's this built up anticipation. You've been planning for however long. You've arrived in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is this charming, beautiful little town. And when I arrived in early mid-May, there was mist hanging everywhere in the valley. And all the buildings have red shutters and it's white stucco. And then these bright, wet green mountains all around it. So it was just like this feast of color, complementary color. So it was very brilliant and beautiful. And so I had arrived on I think the evening of the 11th. I flew out from California on the 10th, so it was a full day of travel. I arrived the morning of the 11th and into Biarritz, and then I took a shuttle to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. So following your advice, I spent an extra day. So I arrived in the afternoon of the 11th, and then so the 12th, I had a full day, just kind of acclimating, figuring out everything. And then the morning of the 13th, I took off. I started my pilgrim, and being one who likes to have kind of complete, to complete things. I walked up to the Pilgrim's Gate at the north end of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to do my selfie, and then this is where the pilgrims would come in to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port when they were coming from France. So I wanted to really have my starting point at the Pilgrim Gate.
Love it.
And so I was there at like 6:30, took my selfie, started through the town, which is the beginning, so that I had a specific start, an official start for my Camino.
I love that. Let me just, if you don't mind, I want to make sure my listeners know where that is. So at the top of the steep hill that takes you up to the pilgrim's office in Saint-Jean, if you go a little bit further, there's the Porte du Saint-Jacques. And it is the gateway where pilgrims coming from France arrive in Saint-Jean and walk down into the center of the town. And it actually has some history. It's the one thing in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port that's an UNESCO World Heritage thing. It's actually listed in that listing. So yeah, so it absolutely is worth getting to that point at some point when you're in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port.
Well, I kind of thought of it as my starting gate.
Yeah, I love that.
And literally starting gate.
Yeah.
And so I started there, walked through town. Pilgrims are starting to come out and beginning their pilgrimage. So it was like a very kind of thoughtful, kind of meditative walk through the city. Yeah. The morning is beginning. It's a little bit misty, and you drop down, then you immediately head up.
Yeah.
Because Saint-Jean-Pied is in a valley. And so it was really misty. And as you were climbing through the mist, it was just really, really picturesque. And then you, as you get a little bit higher up near Orisson, Refuge Orisson, the sun broke through. So you're up above the clouds. And when I arrived in Orisson, that was about 8:30. And so it was a little more than right around 2 hours from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And then the shuttles were dropping off the people who had stayed or had went back down to the valley. So that day was really quite exhilarating because I'm walking up out of the mist. The sun is shining, the blue sky, and all of a sudden, once you cut through that mist, it's just these beautiful mountains, which is they seem familiar, but it's a landscape that I had never experienced before. As you climb up higher and higher, because the Pyrenees are in reality aren't that high as other mountains. They're not coniferous forests; they're actually deciduous. So I think it's beech forest. It's not pine. So the trees are different than what I expect. And then there are these giant rolling meadows that are like the South Downs of England.
Yeah.
And so it was like this smash up of these two different landscapes that I was familiar with, but hadn't seen them together. And it was kind of unexpected. And so I was having a fabulous day. This was the day when I did not listen to anything. I didn't have earphones in. And so I was really experiencing this. And so I'm climbing up through the meadow, and then at 9:30 met you in your group. So that was really, really lovely.
You know what I love about hearing this story is you were behind me because we started at Orisson that day. You started in Saint-Jean. So we're 8 kilometers ahead of you on the trail. And as you're describing the mist, we were up above the mist. And so I have this photo of the sunrise we're above the clouds. The whole valley is socked in with clouds, that mist you were in, and then the sun peaks up. So I'm going to find a way to put that in the show notes because that was just extraordinary. And then, you and I met right by the statue of the Virgin Mary.
right up kind of not all the way at the peak, but almost there. And it was just it. I guess it was kind of the endorphins and the excitement of day one. It was
Yeah.
just such a lovely day. It was. I never had such a kind of an exhilarating day, and I think it was like kind of the excitement of that after 9, 10 months of preparation. This is
Yeah.
actually happening, and it's I'm like I'm not tired. I'm not having problems, and I'm kind of like zooming up this mountain without difficulty. And I'm thinking, wow, this is, it's like this is really incredible. I was expecting to be huffing and puffing, and it's like, oh, this is why am I doing this? But it was just like almost as if I had wings on my feet
Love it. What a feeling.
going up to Roncesvalles. So that that kind of expectation of a very difficult climb was as almost as if that weight had been removed,
Mm.
and then arrived in Roncesvalles before the hotel opened. So the die had been cast from day one.
That's what happens when you fly, my friend. So what would you attribute that to? Because not everybody has that experience of flying up the mountain.
Well, I guess it was preparation.
Hmm.
I was so worried about going up the Pyrenees and that I was going to be out of shape, that I trained
Hmm.
and I was prepared for that. And I guess, I don't know if it's overtraining, but the fact was that what I was doing in preparation for this exceeded what I needed to do. And
Okay.
so it made it pretty, effortless. As
Yeah.
what was I was expecting great difficulty and didn't encounter it, and that was like a kind of a surprise and revelation.
I will tell you the power of training for the Pyrenees. When I first started leading groups, there were a couple of times when I did 3 groups in a row. So I would lead a group, take a week off, go lead another group, take a week off, lead another group. And the first of the 3 was always painful for me. I'd be like,
Sure.
I think I'm going to die going over this hill. And I was at the back, not because I'm sweep, but because I'm slow. The second time, 2 weeks later, I'd be like, all right, I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good. The third time, I'd fly up the mountain.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really strong testimony to the importance of training, but in a particular way. So training so that you have strong legs,
Hmm.
training so that you have cardiovascular health, and training with the weight that you'll be carrying over the Pyrenees.
Yes, and with your hiking poles, your trekking poles,
Yay for hiking poles.
and that's something that will happen on the Camino. I am trying to think, when was this? This was like maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks into the Camino. Walking, you're walking every day, 5, 6, 7 hours, 8 hours out, whatever it is. There were these days when I realized it's like, oh my goodness, I feel so healthy and so alive. And it is, this is basically what you're doing every day is you are training.
Yeah.
And you're walking and you're exercising. And I never felt like that before. It just I felt very healthy and very strong.
It's empowering, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really lovely feeling.
Yeah.
And then there were, a couple days where it's like, okay, is this going to be over yet? But
Are we there yet?
yeah. It was probably a week and a half into the Camino. I ran into my first reverse pilgrim, and
Okay.
and this woman. I think it was around that abandoned golf course town, that golf community.
Siroenia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she was heading in the opposite direction, and with a cart. And I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm not her. I know what that is, and I don't want to repeat it.
Hooray for planes, trains, and automobiles.
Yeah, and then shortly after it seemed like every day from then on, I would see a reverse pilgrim.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, you're hitting some high points here, Kurt, on ways that I always recommend people prepare. You don't have to, but the risk you face of not preparing physically is injury. And so I love that week and a half to 2 day mark that you mentioned, because for me, what I call it is my don't mess with me phase, where I get to this strength level and this confidence that comes with feeling physically strong and healthy. But if you get injured, you don't get there.
Yeah.
And so that's for me, one of the main reasons to train is to prevent injuries.
Well, yes. And also, that's going to affect the quality of your Camino.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not feeling well, and if you hurt yourself in some manner, that's going to affect how your perception of and your experience, your Camino experience. So,
Mm-hmm.
so if you can do as much and everything you can to prepare to prevent that,
Yeah.
I guess that's how I approached it. I tried to prepare as much as I could for eventuality
Mm-hmm.
that was in my control,
Mm-hmm.
and that way, then when I'm there, I can enjoy it.
I love that. There's a new depth of disappointment that comes from having to stop your Camino due to injury or illness. I mean, it's a deep disappointment because people spend 9 months, some people spend 20 years preparing or dreaming of walking the Camino. And then if in the first few days or the first week, you're completely thwarted due to an injury, that's a deep disappointment.
Yeah, it really is. And you want to make everything it work to make everything as possible and as enjoyable
Mm-hmm.
as you can. At least that's my point of view. This was for me something that I'd learned about the Camino years and years ago. I don't remember the kind of the mists of time when it started formulating, but it was really started thinking about this before the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years before the pandemic, and then it didn't happen, and then the pandemic happened, and then it kind of fell off the radar, and then I started thinking about it again. And I tend to be kind of goal oriented and working, and this was a goal that I was working towards. And so I tend to immerse myself in preparation in different ways, not only just training, but also I started studying Spanish. So when I would train, I would stack my Spanish lessons on top. So as I'm walking training for the Camino, I'm also learning Spanish.
Perfect.
And so my lessons, were part of like a half an hour every day when I was hiking. But also, I wanted to understand what I was walking through. So I did a lot of reading on not necessarily the Camino. There was a lot of that, like experiences of the Camino, and there are a lot of authors and there are a lot of books on the Camino. But I wanted to understand where I was walking through. So I started researching the history of Basque, the Basque country, which I really knew nothing about. And there's some wonderful books about the history of Basque. So that first third of the Camino is all about Basque.
Mm-hmm.
And so I studied a lot, or read a lot, I should say, on that. And then I wanted to kind of curate what I was listening to as I was walking through certain landscapes. So from Roncesvalles to Pamplona, I listened to Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. And so as I'm walking through Bragueta, there's Hemingway's.
Hemingway's where he stayed, the hotel. Yeah.
And I did that in several fashion through different sections, listening to not necessarily history, but stories that were set in that landscape, which I also helped kind of give it a holistic point of view for my Camino.
I like that. Now, the one question this might raise for people is, with all of that planning and preparation and curating your playlist, was there still surprise and serendipity in your journey? Was there still that let's see what happens feel?
Well, yes, because it was an experience I'd never experienced before.
Great.
For me, it's very important to understand what I'm experiencing. So reading about what I'm going to see is when I actually see it, I can understand what I'm looking at.
Okay.
For instance, one of the highlights of one of the towns that I was really quite smitten with is Santo Domingo de la Calzada.
Yeah.
There's like the whole story of the chickens and the German pilgrims and the death and the resurrection of an innocent pilgrim. And so when I got to this town, I knew the story, but I was really quite smitten with the town. That was really that was the first town that just kind of ticked all these boxes. So it's a Camino town. You walk through the center of town. I had a gorgeous hostel. It was beautiful. There was a fabulous dia. There was a really beautiful laundry facility. So all of a sudden, these needs are being ticked off. And then the cathedral was really beautiful. The museum was beautiful. And so I went on a tour of the museum and the cathedral, and I was touring through the cathedral and went down into the crypt vault, and there were these incredibly beautiful mosaics, which were completely unexpected.
Really?
Yeah, the vault was done in the mid-century, but these mosaics were done in the early 90s, but they're kind of in a mid-century style. Really beautiful. And that was a completely unexpected detail. And I had at that point forgotten about the chickens. And as I'm walking up out of the vault, there they are. So there was it was just interesting. There were like all the boxes tended to be ticked. So I have a very fond spot for Santo Domingo.
Sure.
Where the same in the opposite could happen, in other places. So that was really kind of a high point of my Camino. I just was like kind of glowing because it like everything worked out. I mean, I got my laundry done, I got some food, I was at a comfortable bed, and saw some beautiful art and a museum and such. And it's a really beautiful town. I think it's one of the there's like a series called the Bonita Villages. Casa Jerez is one of them. Santo Domingo de Calzada is another. But it's a designation of like a beautiful village.
Very nice.
That was one of the lovely days.
Great. It's just such a great reminder, Kurt, to plan the trip that's right for you. So the Camino is the Camino. It's this many kilometers. It passes through these towns, these villages, these cities. But what do you want out of it? Who are you walking through this? And why not make it something that's meaningful to you? I think this is a perfect example of that.
Well, on the opposite spectrum of that, I specifically booked into Casa Jerez because I wanted to see this. And my experience in Casa Jerez was not what I was hoping. So this unexpected Santo Domingo experience was really quite lovely. I was mentioning earlier, after this was the longest day of walking. It was like 41 and a half kilometers. And I wanted to get specifically to Casa Jerez to see the monastery and the castle on the hill and such. And it's a beautiful hillside Camino town. And so it's a long day of walking, and I'm just almost to my Casa Rural, and there's road construction, and the road is completely dug up and fenced. And it's like, how do I get around here? I'm not finding any way. I'm kind of like a rat trapped in a labyrinth, because there are no ways to get around this unless I go back and around and up and around. And so at this day, at the end of the day, it was also late. Things are shutting. And I ended up getting to my Casa Rural, but it ended up not being this magical experience that I had hoped.
Interesting point.
Yeah, ringing the doorbell. It's like there's no signage, but I'm at the right spot. I'm phoning, no answer. There's all these doorbells that I'm ringing. And finally, in the end, it did work out, but there was a bit of, shall we say, stress to that end. So I didn't have the experience in that town, which I had hoped and I had planned.
That's such a great point. Yeah. And it also reminds me that Camino magic is in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
And it's maybe not something that you can schedule.
Correct. I mean, there are things that you can schedule if you have the opening times.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is always the challenge. that was something that I was a little bit surprised about. Hardly any of the churches were open. Now, in the big cities like Lyon and Burgos, they were, but there were a lot of churches that were not open, which I was kind of surprised with that. I thought that I was going to be able to pop my head into a lot more of the little churches than I was able to.
A tip for that for next time, or for people listening, sometimes, and this isn't an always thing, but sometimes you can go to the bar and ask who has the key for the church.
Right.
And sometimes it's the lady who lives 3 houses down, and let me call her and she'll open it for you. It's not all the time, and it's not in every village, but that does sometimes work.
Right.
Yeah. So will there be a next time for you? Are there more Caminos in your future?
That's interesting. I was contemplating that question. At this point, I don't think so. It was such part of my life for the last year. I was thinking I'm not obsessed with it. And then I got to thinking it's like almost every waking hour was focused on the Camino. I even have a scale so I could weigh my backpack, one of the
Absolutely.
So it's like, so I guess I did obsess over that. And I did it. I walked from Saint Jean Pied de Port through Compostela up to Murcia and then down to Finisterre. And so I think I've completed it. I don't know what else. Maybe that could change, but I think I kind of had accomplished what I set out to do.
Okay.
It was a goal. And I walked across Spain in 33 days.
It's amazing. Any other routes calling you? Maybe the Portuguese or the Ingles?
No, I can't say that they are.
Okay.
There may be some rambling heading to Cornwall in a few weeks.
Okay.
So walking down at the south coast there may be in my future. But as far as a Camino, I don't see one now. Who knows? That may change.
Yeah, there's lots of things to do.
Yeah,
lots and lots and lots. Yeah. So I want to just sort of tie up this conversation with just nailing down a couple of things. You mentioned that you stayed in Casa Rurales. What were your accommodations? Albergues, hotels, guest houses? What was your mix, and how did you book them?
Well, it was a combination. I did experience kind of every type of situation. I did stay in albergues twice.
Okay.
I'm at a certain age where bunk beds and communal bathrooms are in my past. So that when I stayed, it was in Viana, and I forget the other town. But anyway, I stayed in albergues at that point, and I was in a private room. So it was the Punta La Reina was the other albergue, Viana and Punta La Reina. I had a private room in an albergue. For the most part, I stayed in Casa Rurales, which are usually, they're like a bed and breakfast. So it was a room in a home, and usually with a private bathroom. There was one in almost Atapuerca,
yes.
Atapuerca. But I was in almost. It was almost Atapuerca. It's the village about 3 kilometers outside, because Atapuerca was booked.
Yes.
So I continued out, and it was a hacienda where I had a room, but a shared. It was a bathroom. So they rented out different bedrooms, and there was so basically had the house to myself until the evening, and there was a Spanish couple that were there as well. So there were a couple bathrooms in the house, and so it was kind of a communal situation.
Okay.
And so there was that, and then also in some hotels, small hotels and hostels.
It's a funny word. It's Hostal, hostal in Spanish. Which is a small, basically family-run hotel.
Right.
Yeah.
So I kind of covered all bases. I booked on Booking.com.
Okay.
So I would book. I had my first 4 days. I had through Punta La Reina booked before I left.
Okay.
And then I wanted to see just what my speed, how I was feeling, what I wanted, what the distance would be. And then after that, I would book maybe 2, 3 days ahead,
Okay.
because that was one of the fears is accommodation, because there was a lot of people on the Camino. The only trouble I really had was my really short day. I couldn't find accommodations on the way to Osabrero, so I ended up it was a real short day at Portal Carce.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it. La Portela de Valcarce or something like that.
Yeah, at the truck stop.
At the truck stop. Very glamorous. Very glamorous. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did that, but it was and that really worked for me because I knew I had a private bathroom and I could do my laundry and watch my telenovelas.
There you go. There you go. You got to have that stuff.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate hearing your experiences. And I know that my listeners will learn a lot from hearing how your Camino went. Is there anything you'd like to say? Any tips for first-time pilgrims that you would share?
Well, yes. One last thing, we didn't really talk about this Compostela to the sea.
Yeah, talk about that.
My route, I went from Compostela up to Murcia and then down to Finisterre. It seems like most people do the reverse. And for me, I wanted to end at Finisterre. So the way is marked in both directions between Finisterre and Murcia. But I do want to point out that I found that the pylons and the markers, when you're walking in the direction from Murcia to Finisterre, were not as obvious. They're not facing you as you're walking to do your turn. On 33 days on the Camino, I took I missed 4 different times.
Okay.
The last day, I missed twice.
Okay.
So I completely missed a turn and walked for about 1.5 kilometers outside of Murcia at the circle when I just was following the road and around the bay. And it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And good thing I had the app. I missed the turn to cross the road and head into it on a trail on the other side of the road. So that was probably my fault. But the fact that there were two times in one day in 6.5, 7 hours that I was, and this was after being very much aware.
You were an expert by then.
Yeah. And so just be aware that the between Murcia and Finisterre, you're probably looking at the side of the marker, not the front of the marker. And so I was noticing the Finisterre to Murcia, the markers were actually facing the oncoming walkers.
Okay.
When I was heading south, they weren't facing. So that's just something to be aware.
Really good to know.
Yeah. Because you become very attuned. I felt like a tracker because it's like, am I on the right road here? And it's like, oh, there's a yellow marker on the tree.
Yeah.
So I know where I am. So that's always nice. Yeah.
Yes. And we learn how to find the trail markers, right? We get really good at it. We get fast. We get to an intersection. We scan. There it is. Scan. There's another one. Scan. There it is. Yeah.
They're not all the same.
Right.
Some of them are, professional ones. Others are just, spray paint on a rock.
Yeah.
Which is very very cool. But yeah, you become a tracker, and like you discern these. And it was also, that was something that I was doing is I document with a lot of photographs. So I was photographing all the different types of markers on the Camino as well. So
excellent. Well, I so appreciate hearing your experiences. Since the last time I saw you was Pamplona.
Yes.
And then you were off to the races far ahead of my group, I think. So yeah, it's just great to hear your experiences. Thanks for taking the time, Kurt, to share. all
Well,
of
thank
this.
you. I appreciate it, and it's a wonderful experience, and I'm certainly glad that I did it, and I think that it is a wonderful life experience, no matter at what stage of life you're in. This was a kind of a goal as I'm turning a certain age in a couple weeks that I wanted to actually do this because I think it's very important to friends of ours have this saying QTR, or an acronym QTR, quality time remaining. And I wanted to be able to do this while I could still experience it, be healthy and active, and somewhat fit. And so I think it's important to think about these things as we all begin to age, to do things now and enjoy them instead of putting them into the future because maybe they wouldn't be able to happen.
I'm lifting my glass to that, toasting that. Yeah. Excellent. Kurt, thanks so much. Just a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thank you, Nancy. It's wonderful to be here.
All right.